When 9-year-old Caio boarded the bus clutching his lone coin meant for lunch, he never imagined he'd face a choice that would ripple through his life and others. Spotting a distressed woman denied passage due to lack of fare, Caio's spontaneous act of generosity set events into motion that no one could have foreseen. The following morning, an unexpected visitor awaited him, altering the course of his family's destiny in ways that would leave their community astounded. This is another heartfelt narrative from Mr. Edwards' Tales, where stories resonate deeply, prompting reflection on life's profound moments. I know the way, Dad. I swear I do. I can go alone, and everything will be fine. Caio's voice came out steady, but his eyes carried that mix of nervousness and courage that only a child trying to be strong can muster. Jonas, kneeling in front of him, ran a hand over his unshaven face, trying to mask the weight in his chest. He looked at his son, small, thin, wearing sneakers with frayed laces and a patched-up jacket, and felt his heart twist. The job interview was in 40 minutes across the city, and missing it could mean another month of cold nights, empty plates and rent notices slipped under the door. He glanced once more at his phone. Still no answer from Donna Tida, the elderly neighbor who had promised to take Caio to school. "You've never gone alone before," Jonas said, grabbing his son's shoulders. "It's not just knowing which bus to take. You have to stay close to the driver. Don't talk to strangers, and don't, under any circumstance, get off at the wrong stop." Caio nodded, lips pressed tight. "I'm not a baby, Dad. I'll go. You have to go too. We can't miss it." Jonas took a breath and reached into his pocket, pulling out a single reel, the last coin he had, and placed it in Caio's hand with trembling fingers. "You know what this is for," Jonas said, voice tight with emotion. "Don't lose it. Don't spend it on candy or soda. Today's pizza day at school. You've been talking about it for weeks." Caio stared at the coin as if it were made of gold. "I won't. Lose it," he whispered. Jonas stood, opened the apartment door, and watched as his son stepped out into the early morning bustle, backpack bouncing against his back, shoes scraping against the concrete stairwell. He closed the door slowly, forehead resting against the frame for a moment before turning away. He had no choice. Not today. Outside, Caio walked toward the bus stop alone, gripping the coin tightly. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was his lunch. It was a dream of gooey cheese and crispy crust. It was the last bit of control his father could offer in a world that often took more than it gave. When the bus creaked into view, Caio's heart skipped. He stepped up to the front, looking at the driver, an older man with a permanent scowl and tired eyes that didn't lift to meet his. The driver grunted, hand open. Caio dropped the coin in with hesitation, the sound of it clinking into the box sharper than he expected. The driver yanked a stub from the machine and shoved it toward him without a word. Caio took it, muttering, "Good morning." But the man didn't respond. He walked slowly down the aisle, choosing a seat near the window in the middle of the bus. The city, outside, looked unfamiliar without his father beside him. Gray buildings with cracked windows, tired faces on sidewalks, a rhythm of survival. Inside the bus, Caio sat quietly, both hands clutching his backpack as though it could shield him from the unknown. He tried to focus on school, on the taste of pizza, but his mind wandered. What if he got off at the wrong stop? What if someone tried to talk to him? What if the driver just didn't care? The knot in his stomach tightened. He could still smell the coffee his dad brewed, feel the warmth of his hand placing the coin in his palm. That last coin, his slice of pizza, his small victory. 3 stops later, the bus door opened and a woman stepped in, pausing at the entrance. Her coat was torn at the sleeves, and her face had a smear of dried blood near her cheek. Her hands shook as she searched her pockets. "Please," she said softly to the driver, "I lost my wallet. I just need to get to Santa Lucia Hospital. I swear I can pay later." The driver didn't blink. "This ain't charity," he barked. "You people always have some story." The words hit the air with force. No one reacted. A man in a suit looked away. A woman turned up her music. Caio's stomach turned. He watched the woman take a step back, face flushed, lips trembling but not crying. She tried again, quieter. "Please. I was robbed. I'm not asking for a handout." The driver leaned forward. "Then get off. I've had enough of the lies and the junkies." The woman didn't move. Caio's fingers tightened around the edge of his seat, heart thudding painfully. Something in her voice, in her face, made him feel a strange mix of fear, pity, and anger. No one should be talked to like that. Caio didn't remember standing up. His body acted on instinct. He walked toward the front of the bus, the stares of strangers following him like invisible threads. He reached into the pocket of his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the transfer stub. His fingers brushed against something else, another coin. He had forgotten about it, tucked away days ago, a spare reel, from a leftover errand. He held it now, his hands shaking. It was pizza day, the cafeteria tray, the smell of melted cheese. It was all so close. But this woman was being humiliated. She stood there, eyes red, as if begging the world to see her. And no one did. No one but Caio. "Here," he said, stepping forward and holding out the coin. "She can have mine." The driver blinked, incredulous. "What?" "She can ride with my coin," Caio repeated louder this time. "Please." A hush fell over the bus. One man at the back dropped a few coins into the tray. A woman murmured, "Let the boy be." The driver growled under his breath but grabbed the coin and waved the woman in. She walked slowly down the aisle, eyes wide with disbelief. As she passed Caio, she whispered, "Thank you." He said nothing. He just nodded and returned to his seat, trying not to cry. His hands were clenched. His chest felt heavy. He hadn't saved the world. He hadn't stopped the driver from being cruel. But he had done something. He had seen her, not as a problem, not as a burden, just as a person. And in that moment, that mattered more than pizza, more than fear. It mattered more than anything. The woman sat beside him, quiet at first. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted her coat. Her breathing was still shaky, like she'd just escaped a storm. Caio stared ahead, not ready to speak. Then she whispered, "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged. "Yeah, I did." She turned toward him, her voice softer now. "Why?" "Because no one else was going to," he said simply. That silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was sacred. She reached into her coat and pulled out a pen. On the back of the transfer slip, she scribbled a few details she could remember. Route 37, 6:45 a.m., near Estrella School. She wasn't sure why she needed to remember this, but something inside her said that this act, so small, so profound, would echo beyond this bus ride. Caio stood as the bus neared his stop. The woman watched him go. He gave a small wave, didn't look back. She pressed her fingers to the glass as he disappeared into the crowd. In her other hand, she still held the napkin he had offered her earlier. It was just a napkin, but to her, it felt like a thread, one she couldn't let go of. Not now, not ever. The bus door snapped shut behind Caio with a loud clank, and without looking at him, the driver, a burly man in his late 50s with a stiff jaw and deep lines etched into his face, extended his hand mechanically. Caio hesitated for just a second, then placed the coin carefully in the man's palm. The driver, a milkar, didn't offer even a grunt in response, just tore the fare stub from the small machine and shoved it toward the boy, still without eye contact. Caio took it silently and made his way down the narrow aisle, clutching his backpack tight. As he slid into a seat near the middle, his eyes flicked toward the rearview mirror above the driver's head. Amilcar's expression hadn't changed. It remained stern, sunken into a permanent scowl. There was a hardness to him that seemed older than his body, like someone who had long ago decided the world had nothing left to offer but irritation. Caio pressed his back against the seat, trying to shrink into the upholstery. Around him, the bus rumbled on through cracked streets and broken sidewalks, past walls painted with flaking graffiti. He was alone, surrounded by strangers, but the unease came less from the unfamiliar and more from the man in the driver's seat, the one who didn't seem to see him at all. At the fourth stop, Amilcar slammed on the brakes harder than necessary, and a few passengers jolted forward, gripping the nearest poles. The hiss of the door opening was followed by hesitation. Someone stood on the first step, but didn't move forward. Caio leaned slightly into the aisle and saw her. A woman, thin, in her late 20s maybe, with a limp that favored her left side and blood caked just beneath her temple. Her coat was 2 sizes too large, and its sleeves were shredded at the cuffs. Mud clung to the hem, and one of her shoes was missing a sole. But what struck Caio most wasn't her appearance. It was the way she held herself, not defeated, but defiant. like someone who refused to shrink no matter how cold the stares or harsh the words. She reached into her pocket and paused, her fingers fumbling against the fabric. Her voice was calm, too calm for someone who had clearly suffered. "I lost my wallet," she said evenly. "I just need to get to Santa Lucia Hospital. I can pay later, I promise." She stood still, composed but visibly hurt. She wasn't begging, she was explaining. But Amilcar only laughed under his breath, a dry, contemptuous sound. "Oh, I've heard that one before," Amilcar said, leaning back in his seat. "Every week it's something new. Lost wallets, sick mothers, job interviews. You people never run out of stories." His voice had a rhythm to it. Practiced, cruelty, polished like a weapon used often. The woman didn't flinch. She took a small step forward, her hands now folded in front of her like she was pleading for logic, not mercy. "I'm not lying. I was attacked last night. I woke up in a stairwell. I need help, not charity." But Amilcar didn't budge. "Then you better walk, because this is not a rescue mission. This is public transport, not a soup kitchen." There were a few passengers scattered across the seats. A man in a rumpled suit, a teenager with earphones, a woman holding a shopping bag, but none of them looked up. Their eyes stayed glued to the floor or their phones, as if looking directly at her might draw them into something dangerous or inconvenient. Caio watched it all, frozen, his fingers digging into the vinyl edge of his seat. The woman looked around, seeking one pair of eyes that would meet hers. None did. Her jaw tightened, and her knees trembled slightly beneath her. She didn't cry. Instead, she squared her shoulders, swallowing whatever shame tried to rise. "I just need a ride," she repeated, quieter this time. "Please, just this once." Amilcar rose halfway from his seat, one hand still gripping the wheel. "Lady, if you don't have the fare, you don't have a ride. Simple. I've got rules, and I'm not breaking them, because some junkie with a sob story limps onto my bus bleeding." Caio's breath caught. The word junkie sliced through the air with more violence than volume. He looked again at the woman, how her lip quivered but didn't drop, how her chin held firm even though her eyes brimmed with disbelief. The driver had already turned away from her, ready to close the door in her face. And still, no one moved. Not the man with the tie, not the boy with the headphones. Everyone pretended she wasn't there, and that silence, thick, heavy, and cruel, was almost louder than the driver's insult. Caio's stomach knotted with a kind of rage he didn't fully understand. It wasn't just about the woman or the driver. It was about the way they all just sat there, the way everyone silently agreed to ignore the injustice in front of them. He remembered the time a shopkeeper had followed his dad around a store for 10 minutes, just because they didn't trust the way he looked. No one had spoken up then, either. He didn't even realize he had stood until the edge of his seat was behind him. The bus kept rolling slowly forward, as if the world wasn't cracking open right there in front of everyone. Caio walked toward the front of the bus. His feet felt heavy, like each step was a test of who he was becoming. The woman turned her head as he approached, confusion mixed with caution on her face. Amilcar looked down at him, one eyebrow raised. "You lost something, kid?" he sneered. Caio didn't respond. He reached into the side pocket of his backpack, searching until his fingers found the smooth edge of a folded piece of paper. It wasn't the fare stub. It was another coin, forgotten, flattened between books and pencils. He pulled the coin out and held it up. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice. The cafeteria pizza had a crispy crust and melted cheese that made the whole room smell like celebration. It wasn't just food. It was the closest thing to normal he got during the week. That coin was his slice, his moment. But here was someone being denied their humanity over a coin, and no one else was going to do anything. So he did. "She can use mine," he said. His voice cracked slightly, but it held. "I'll walk if I have to." Amilcar looked at him, like he was insane. "This your mother?" he asked. Caio shook his head. "Then why do you care?" That question hung between them for a moment, more honest than the man probably intended. Caio didn't answer with words. He just extended the coin again, his arm steady. Behind them, the man with the tie shifted uncomfortably. A woman near the front cleared her throat. Then someone at the back, unseen, tossed a few coins into the fare tray. They clinked softly, but they roared in Caio's ears. Amilcar exhaled sharply through his nose and snatched the coin from Caio's hand. "Fine, get on. But don't. But make a habit out of this." He waved the woman in with a flick of his wrist, like swatting away a fly. She stepped aboard slowly, passing by Caio with eyes wide and mouth trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Caio didn't reply. He turned and walked back to his seat, his legs shaking. The moment he sat, he pulled his backpack tight against his chest. His heart thumped loudly, and he could feel his face burning, not with shame, with something stronger, a kind of pride wrapped in pain. He had spoken up. He had done something. The woman sat beside him, and for a moment, neither said a word. Around them, the other passengers resumed their silence, but it wasn't the same anymore. Something had shifted. A crack had formed in the indifference. The woman kept her eyes on her hands, her fingers still trembling. "You really didn't have to do that," she murmured. Caio glanced at her, his voice now firm, quiet but certain. "I know, but someone had to." She looked at him with a strange softness, her expression caught between awe and guilt. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caio," he replied. She nodded slowly. "I'm Lucia." There was a pause between them. "People don't usually see me anymore," she said after a moment. "Not really. Not like you did." Caio didn't know how to answer that, so he didn't. He just looked out the window, wondering if his father had made it to the interview, wondering if Lucia would be okay, wondering what would happen tomorrow, and if it would matter that today he had made the right choice. Not for reward, not for praise, just because he could. "She can take mine," Caio said, louder this time, his small voice slicing through the murmur of the moving bus. He was standing now just 2 rows behind the driver, his arm stretched out with the coin in his trembling hand. Every muscle in his body was tense, and his face burned with the kind of heat that comes from doing something scary, something that no one else had dared to do. The woman at the front, her face bruised and streaked with dried blood, turned slowly to face him. Her eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe the words had come from him. A child, alone, no taller than the fare box. Amilcar, the driver, stared at Caio with narrowed eyes and something dangerously close to mockery curling his lip. "This your mom?" he grunted, clearly irritated by the interruption. "No," Caio replied firmly, hand still extended. "Then why do you care?" the man barked, almost amused now. Caio didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply stepped forward, coin in hand, closer to the woman whose dignity had been trampled under the weight of rules no one questioned. The atmosphere inside the bus had changed. Conversations had ceased entirely. The woman with the shopping bag lowered her phone and stared. The teenage boy who had been nodding to music pulled out an earbud. The old man near the back leaned forward, his hands gripping his cane with a kind of reverence. They all watched Caio, not with pity, but with surprise, because something had happened. Something had shifted. Caio, without realizing it, had broken the script. He wasn't supposed to interfere. He was supposed to stay in his seat, stay invisible, like everyone else. But he hadn't, and now the rules felt different. For a moment, Amilcar didn't move. He looked at Caio like the boy was a problem he didn't know how to fix. Then, with a huff and a shake of his head, he snatched the coin from Caio's palm and flicked his wrist toward the woman. "Get in! Don't make a scene!" His words dripped with resentment, but the damage was done. His control had been punctured. The woman, now blinking rapidly, seemed to hesitate, as if she still couldn't believe someone, let alone a child, had intervened for her. She stepped forward slowly, each movement uncertain, as if afraid the moment might vanish. As she passed Caio, she lowered her eyes to his and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice cracked on the second word. Caio gave a single small nod, not trusting himself to speak. His throat was tight. When he turned back to his seat, he felt every pair of eyes follow him, but none more than hers. She took the empty seat beside him, settling in carefully, clutching her tattered coat around her. Caio kept his gaze straight ahead, his heart pounding in his ears. He had never done anything like that before. He wasn't even sure what had made him stand up. It wasn't bravery. At least it hadn't felt like it. It had felt like necessity, like something had been wrong, and he had been the only one willing to Say so. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the bus rumbling along the broken road was the only thing filling the space between them. Caio clutched his backpack against his chest, his fingers digging into the fabric as if trying to steady his breathing. The woman beside him, Sonia, though he didn't know her name yet, sat stiffly, her eyes flicking from the driver to the other passengers and back again. She looked like someone waiting for the next blow to fall, even if it was only words. Finally, in a voice so soft it almost disappeared into the seat between them, she said, "You didn't have to do that, you know." Caio shrugged, but didn't look at her. "Yeah, I did." There was no boast in his tone, no pride, just the simple, tired truth of someone who had seen something unfair and decided it couldn't stay that way. Sonia turned slightly, studying him. His face was still red from the adrenaline, his breathing a little uneven, but his eyes were steady now. There was something in them, not innocence but clarity, like he understood more than any 9-year-old should. "Why?" she asked again, almost like she couldn't help herself. "Why did you care?" Caio looked down at his lap, then at the empty space where the coin used to be. "Because nobody else was going to," he said, "and it wasn't right." His answer hung in the air, heavy and pure. Sonia swallowed hard. She didn't have a response, not a real one, because she knew he was right. She had walked into that bus expecting cruelty. She had endured it. And yet, in the midst of it, this child had offered something no adult had, his last coin, and with it, her right to exist in that space with dignity. She reached into her coat and pulled out a pen, one of the few things she still had from the life, before everything fell apart. She tore a corner from the transfer slip still tucked in the seam of the seat in front of her and scribbled something down quickly. Route 37, 6:42 a.m., Estrella stop, 3rd grade, name, Caio. She didn't know why she wrote it down. She didn't have a plan, but something inside her said she had to remember that this wasn't over, that this small boy had done something big, something world-tilting, and she couldn't just walk away from it. She folded the paper carefully and slid it into the inner pocket of her coat. Then she reached into her other pocket and pulled out a napkin. It was clean, just slightly crumpled, and she handed it to Caio without a word. He took it, eyes flicking to hers, and nodded once. No thank yous, no explanations, just understanding. When the bus reached the Estrella stop, Caio stood. Sonia didn't. She watched him shoulder his backpack, his small frame standing tall as he walked down the aisle. The driver didn't meet his eyes. No one said anything, but everyone watched. Caio stepped off the bus and kept walking. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had done what he came to do. And even though his stomach ached with hunger and his hands were still shaking, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the kind that comes with strength or money, but the kind that comes from choice, from action, from doing what's right when no one else will. Sonia stayed on the bus until the next stop, still, holding the folded note in her pocket like a lifeline. She didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let that boy disappear from her life like a stranger passed in the street. He had given her more than a bus ride. He had given her a reason to believe again. And, somehow, she was going to find a way to thank him, not with words, not with gifts, but with something real, because that's what he had given her, something real and priceless. "She can take mine," Caio said, louder this time, his small voice slicing through the murmur of the moving bus. He was standing now just 2 rows behind the driver, his arm stretched out with the coin in his trembling hand. Every muscle in his body was tense, and his face burned with the kind of heat that comes from doing something scary, something that no one else had dared to do. The woman at the front, her face bruised and streaked with dried blood, turned slowly to face him. Her eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe the words had come from him. A child, alone, no taller than the fare box. A milk car, the driver, stared at Caio with narrowed eyes and something dangerously close to mockery curling his lip. "This your mom?" he grunted, clearly irritated by the interruption. "No," Caio replied firmly, hand still extended. "Then why do you care?" the man barked, almost amused now. Caio didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply stepped forward, coin in hand, closer to the woman whose dignity had been trampled under the weight of rules no one questioned. The atmosphere inside the bus had changed. Conversations had ceased entirely. The woman with the shopping bag lowered her phone and stared. The teenage boy who had been nodding to music pulled out an earbud. The old man near the back leaned forward, his hands gripping his cane with a kind of reverence. They all watched Caio, not with pity, but with surprise, because something had happened. Something had shifted. Caio, without realizing it, had broken the script. He wasn't supposed to interfere. He was supposed to stay in his seat, stay invisible, like everyone else. But he hadn't, and now the rules felt different. For a moment, Amilcar didn't move. He looked at Caio like the boy was a problem he didn't know how to fix. Then, with a huff and a shake of his head, he snatched the coin from Caio's palm and flicked his wrist toward the woman. "Get in. Don't make a scene." His words dripped with resentment, but the damage was done. His control had been punctured. The woman, now blinking rapidly, seemed to hesitate, as if she still couldn't believe someone, let alone a child, had intervened for her. She stepped forward slowly, each movement uncertain, as if afraid the moment might vanish. As she passed Caio, she lowered her eyes to his and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice cracked on the second word. Caio gave a single small nod, not trusting himself to speak. His throat was tight. When he turned back to his seat, he felt every pair of eyes follow him, but none more than hers. She took the empty seat beside him, settling in carefully, clutching her tattered coat around her. Caio kept his gaze straight ahead, his heart pounding in his ears. He had never done anything like that before. He wasn't even sure what had made him stand up. It wasn't bravery. At least it hadn't felt like it. It had felt like necessity, like something had been wrong, and he had been the only one willing to say so. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the bus rumbling along the broken road was the only thing filling the space between them. Caio clutched his backpack against his chest, his fingers digging into the fabric as if trying to steady his breathing. The woman beside him, Sonia, though he didn't know her name yet, sat stiffly, her eyes flicking from the driver to the other passengers and back again. She looked like someone waiting for the next blow to fall, even if it was only words. Finally, in a voice so soft it almost disappeared into the seat between them, she said, "You didn't have to do that, you know." Caio shrugged, but didn't look at her. "Yeah, I did." There was no boast in his tone, no pride, just the simple, tired truth of someone who had seen something unfair and decided it couldn't stay that way. Sonia turned slightly, studying him. His face was still red from the adrenaline, his breathing a little uneven, but his eyes were steady now. There was something in them, not innocence but clarity, like he understood more than any 9-year-old should. "Why?" she asked again, almost like she couldn't help herself. "Why did you care?" Caio looked down at his lap, then at the empty space where the coin used to be. "Because nobody else was going to," he said, "and it wasn't right." His answer hung in the air, heavy and pure. Sonia swallowed hard. She didn't have a response, not a real one, because she knew he was right. She had walked into that bus expecting cruelty. She had endured it. And yet, in the midst of it, this child had offered something no adult had, his last coin, and with it, her right to exist in that space with dignity. She reached into her coat and pulled out a pen, one of the few things she still had from the life, before everything fell apart. She tore a corner from the transfer slip still tucked in the seam of the seat in front of her and scribbled something down quickly. Route 37, 6:42 a.m., Estrella stop, 3rd grade, name, Caio. She didn't know why she wrote it down. She didn't have a plan, but something inside her said she had to remember that this wasn't over, that this small boy had done something big, something world-tilting, and she couldn't just walk away from it. She folded the paper carefully and slid it into the inner pocket of her coat. Then she reached into her other pocket and pulled out a napkin. It was clean, just slightly crumpled, and she handed it to Caio without a word. He took it, eyes flicking to hers, and nodded once. No thank yous, no explanations, just understanding. When the bus reached the Estrella stop, Caio stood. Sonia didn't. She watched him shoulder his backpack, his small frame standing tall as he walked down the aisle. The driver didn't meet his eyes. No one said anything. but everyone watched. Caio stepped off the bus and kept walking. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had done what he came to do. And even though his stomach ached with hunger and his hands were still shaking, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Not the kind that comes with strength or money, but the kind that comes from choice, from action, from doing what's right when no one else will. Sonia stayed on the bus until the next stop, still, holding the folded note in her pocket like a lifeline. She didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let that boy disappear from her life like a stranger passed in the street. He had given her more than a bus ride. He had given her a reason to believe again. And somehow, she was going to find a way to thank him. Not with words, not with gifts, but with something real. Because that's what he had given her. Something real and priceless. Deseja que eu continue com o capítulo 4? Você disse, quero que você desenvolva o capítulo abaixo seguindo à risca essas diretrizes. O que fazer? 1. Riqueza de conversas, detalhes e acontecimentos. 2. Parágrafos bem encorpados. Cada parágrafo deve ter o mínimo de 200 palavras. Não pode ser menos que isso por parágrafo. 3. Foque apenas no capítulo citado abaixo. 4. No mínimo, 8 parágrafos com 200 palavras mínimas. Cada um. 5. Começar o capítulo escrevendo acontecimento ou diálogos, sem enrolar com palavras desnecessárias sobre o clima, ou sons, ou tempo. O que não fazer? 1. Não colocar subtítulos durante a escrita. 2. Não abusar de coisas relacionadas ao tempo, ou sons, ou clima, por exemplo. O silêncio que se seguiu a tensa troca entre Olivia e Samantha foi espesso. O barulho do vento ecoou. Os sons do sapato de Pedro arrastando pelo chão ardiam como chamas de um vulcão em erupção. 3. Não escrever parágrafos com menos de 6 linhas. Capítulo 4. A promessa de Sônia. Sônia se senta ao lado de Caio e tenta agradecer. Ele apenas diz, eu só fiz porque ninguém mais fez. Emocionada, ela anota detalhes do menino em um pedaço do bilhete de ônibus. Não sabe exatamente o motivo, mas sente que precisa retribuir. Mal sabe ela que está prestes a mudar a vida de Caio e de seu pai para sempre. O chat GPT disse, I only did it because no one else did, Caio said, his voice steady, despite the shakiness in his limbs. Sonia had just murmured a trembling, thank you, her lips barely forming the words, as she settled into the seat beside him. She looked at him, stunned, like someone who had just witnessed something sacred and wasn't sure how to name it. The boy didn't meet her gaze. He kept his eyes forward, hands gripping his backpack, the traces of resolve still painted across his young face. Sonia swallowed, feeling the sting in her throat intensify. It wasn't just his action that pierced her. It was the clarity of his motive. He hadn't done it for recognition or praise. He hadn't hesitated, bargained, or asked questions. He had acted from instinct, from something raw and moral that so few adults seem to hold anymore. Sonia blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the flood inside her. She had been judged, insulted, and almost discarded by a world that didn't even pretend to care anymore. And yet here sat a child, no more than 9, who had handed her the only thing he had, just because it was the right thing to do. Reaching into her coat, Sonia's fingers brushed the corner of a transfer slip tucked into the lining of the seat in front of her. She hesitated for a second before tearing off a clean edge of the ticket. Her hand still trembled slightly as she searched for the pen she always kept hidden deep in her coat lining, a silver one with initials etched into the side, a gift from another life, when she still had a job, a desk, a nameplate. With slow, careful movements, she began to write on the torn slip. Route 37, 6:42 a.m., Estrella stop 3rd grade. Then she paused, glancing sideways at Caio, studying the curve of his face, the scuffed edge of his shoe, the backpack strap worn thin from too many seasons. He looked like so many boys, too small for the burdens they carried. She added his name, Caio. The letters were deliberate, precise, and for a moment she just held the paper in her lap, staring at it like it might explain what had just happened. She didn't know exactly what she intended to do with it, but something told her she couldn't just let him disappear into the crowd like nothing had happened. Sonia turned slightly toward him again, this time softer. Caio, she said, her voice a bit more stable. Do you always ride this bus? Alone? Caio didn't flinch. Only today, he replied, glancing up at her. My dad had a job interview. He couldn't take me. We didn't have anyone else. That simple sentence hit Sonia like a gust of wind she hadn't braced for. She thought of all the mornings she'd been driven to school as a child, the packed lunches, the warm hand squeezing her shoulder before she walked out the door. And now here was Caio, carrying more than just a backpack, carrying adult fears inside a child's body. You're very brave, she said softly. Caio shrugged. I'm just doing what I have to. That statement, what I have to, echoed in her like a bell. She wanted to ask more, but something in his posture warned her not to pry. This wasn't a boy looking for sympathy. This was someone who had already learned too much about disappointment and who had decided, even so, to be kind. The bus rocked slightly as it rolled past another intersection, and Sonia held the paper tightly in her hand. The note she had written felt heavier now, like it contained a promise she hadn't fully spoken yet. She didn't have a plan, but she felt a pressure deep in her chest, a need to make this right. Not because she felt guilty, though part of her did. Not because she thought he needed rescuing, but because he had reminded her, in the simplest, most profound way, of the person she used to be. Someone who believed in good, someone who acted without permission, someone who saw people, not problems. What's your dad's name? She asked after a pause. Caio hesitated, then said, Jonas. That name went straight to the heart of her determination. She didn't know yet how she would find him, but now she had a name, a stop, a time. It was enough, and she would make sure that this boy, this brave, resilient boy, would not go unnoticed. When the bus reached Estrella stop, Caio rose with a determined, silent motion. He slung his backpack over his shoulder, adjusted the straps, and glanced at Sonia one last time. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just nodded, as if to say, this was enough. And then he walked down the aisle, each step light but purposeful. Sonia watched him all the way to the door, even as Amilcar refused to meet his eyes. As Caio stepped off the bus, Sonia pressed her fingers to the window pane and followed him with her gaze until he disappeared behind a row of cars parked near the school gates. She kept her hand on the glass a moment longer, then pulled it back, clenching the note tightly in her fist. She didn't understand yet why this mattered so much, but she knew that she wouldn't let this moment dissolve into the blur of forgotten days. Not this one. As the bus pulled, away, and she felt the momentum carry her further from the boy, Sonia leaned back into her seat and took a breath. She stared at the ceiling of the bus for a moment, as if the answer to her swirling emotions might be hidden in the cracks of plastic panels above her. Then she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and turned it on. The cracked screen came to life, lighting up with missed calls, unread messages, and news notifications she didn't care about. She stared at the home screen, thumb hovering over the contact labeled Dad, but didn't press it. Instead, she opened her camera app and snapped a photo of the paper with Caio's details. She uploaded it to the cloud immediately. She didn't want to lose it. She couldn't. She needed a record of the boy who had reminded her of something deeply human, the courage to care. Sonia spent the rest of the ride without speaking. Her mind was already working through possibilities. Who could she contact? Was there a way to find his school? Would they let her speak to someone, to verify the name, the details? She had contacts, or had once, in educational outreach programs and social advocacy circles. Maybe she could reach out discreetly. She didn't want to spook the boy or his father. She didn't want to come off as someone trying to interfere, but she had to do something. She couldn't just go back to her world, fractured and unfinished as it was, pretending that what happened on that bus had no weight. That coin, that gesture, that boy's steady gaze, it had all planted something in her, a sense of urgency, a demand for action. And Sonia was not the type to ignore a calling when it came. By the time the bus stopped near the downtown medical clinic, Sonia stood slowly, feeling her knees ache beneath her. Her body still carried the bruises from the night before, and every step reminded her of what she'd survived. But her heart, for the first time in weeks, felt a little lighter. Not because her pain had vanished. It hadn't. but because she'd seen something pure, and now she was carrying it with her. That folded piece of paper, safely tucked into her wallet, felt like a vow. She stepped off the bus and didn't look back. She was already thinking ahead, to the phone calls, to the office visit, to finding Jonas. Because if Caio could give her his last coin with nothing to gain, the least she could do was make sure that kindness wasn't wasted in silence. "I'm looking for a student named Caio," Sonia said clearly, standing before the front desk of Escola Municipal Estrella. Her voice didn't shake, though her hands were gripping the strap of her purse tightly. She was dressed modestly now, clean jeans, a plain navy blouse, and a thin scarf that barely concealed the fading bruise along her jaw. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her face freshly washed. Nothing about her shouted distress anymore, but under the surface, her heart pounded. This wasn't just a visit, it was a mission. She held her posture firm as the receptionist, a woman with reading, glasses perched low on her nose and a clipboard in hand, glanced up with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "And you are?" the receptionist asked, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. Sonia leaned slightly forward. "Someone he helped yesterday. I just want to thank him. I don't need records or personal data, just a way to pass on a message." The receptionist's expression shifted subtly to one of skepticism. "We don't give out information about students to strangers," she said flatly. "School policy, for safety reasons." Sonia expected the resistance, but disappointment still brushed her chest. Before she could respond, the door behind her opened, and a man in a gray uniform stepped in, holding a folded document in one hand and adjusting the strap of a delivery bag on his shoulder. His face was lined with stress, eyes alert as if he were always preparing for something to go wrong. Jonas had come to the school that morning to finalize the paperwork for Caio's school lunch subsidy. It was a task he'd been putting off because the process usually involved long waits and awkward glances. As he stepped into the office, he overheard the name Caio, spoken aloud by a woman with a calm but firm tone. His shoulders stiffened instantly. There was only one Caio in his life, and hearing his son's name from a stranger made every instinct in him sharpen. He stopped near the doorway, watching for a moment as the woman tried to explain herself to the receptionist. Then, cautiously, he stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice measured but wary. Sonia turned at the sound. Their eyes met, hers recognizing something familiar, his guarded but curious. "I'm Caio's father," he said carefully. "Why are you asking about my son?" Sonia hesitated, then stepped back to give him space. Her voice softened, but her words were clear. "Yesterday, on the bus, your son helped me. He gave up his fare so I could ride. It was just one coin, but it was everything. I didn't know who to tell or how to find him, but I remembered the stop, the time, his name. I had to come." Jonas's face didn't relax immediately. He studied her with a father's instinct, not only protective, but deeply tired. "You're the woman from the bus," he said slowly. It wasn't a question. He was putting pieces together. "Caio told me about what happened. I didn't expect you to show up here." Sonia nodded. "I didn't expect it either, but he did something that most grown-ups wouldn't. I couldn't forget it." Jonas took a step closer, eyes searching hers for signs of hidden motives. "You're not here to cause trouble." "No," she said firmly. "I'm here because I believe in repaying kindness. Not with money, not even with words, but with something real." Jonas exhaled, a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Something in her tone, her posture, the raw honesty in her face. It eased the tension in his chest. The receptionist, still behind her desk, watched the exchange unfold with silent curiosity. Her posture softened slightly now that the woman wasn't a complete stranger, but she said nothing more, allowing the interaction to continue without interference. Jonas gestured toward a small bench near the wall. "Do you have a minute?" Sonia nodded. They both sat, and for a few moments, neither spoke. Then Jonas glanced at her. "He didn't tell me much, just that someone needed help, and he did what he could." Sonia looked down at her hands. "That's exactly what he did, and he didn't hesitate. He didn't ask who I was or what I'd done. He just acted, like it was the most natural thing in the world." Jonas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "He's been through a lot. We both have. But he's got this thing in him, this compass. I don't know where it came from, honestly. Sonia smiled faintly. Maybe from you. Jonas chuckled dryly. I don't know about that. Most days. I'm just trying to make sure we both get through without breaking. I understand that more than you think, Sonia replied, her voice quieter now. I've been through some hard things lately. Lost my job, my apartment, family, distanced. And yesterday, when that driver looked at me like I was trash, I started to believe it. Until your son looked at me differently, like I mattered, like I was worth something. Jonas's jaw tensed. That part of the story hit deeper than he expected. It's hard out there. People stop seeing each other. They look right through you, like you're invisible unless you cause a problem. Exactly, she said. But Caio saw me, and I don't think he even realizes how rare that is. Jonas was quiet for a long time, then finally said, You came here just to say that? Sonia nodded slowly. Yes, and maybe more, if you'll let me. Jonas's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of more? Support, she answered. For his schooling, for you, if you're open to it. I have some connections. I'm not promising miracles, but I want to help, discreetly, quietly, no strings attached. Jonas sat back against the bench, staring ahead at the pale green wall opposite him. For a man used to being told no at every corner. No support, no job, no understanding. This offer didn't feel real. You're serious? He asked. Completely, Sonia said. I've already reached out to a contact in the education department. They might be able to fast-track some assistance. Nothing fancy. Just enough to ease the pressure. It's the least I can do. Jonas rubbed his hands over his face, the stubble scratching under his palms. You know how rare this is, right? People don't just show up like this. Sonia smiled faintly. I wasn't planning to, but Caio changed something in me. He reminded me that the world doesn't have to stay broken, that we can still do something when it matters. Jonas looked at her, the suspicion finally giving way to something gentler, a cautious hope. Okay, he said. Let's talk. Let's see what this looks like. Sonia nodded, her grip on the purse loosening. She hadn't expected him to say yes, but now that he had, she knew. This was just the beginning. I work in the social development division at Medisol, Sonia said, her voice steady, but with a hint of something personal beneath the professionalism. Jonas blinked, sitting straighter on the small bench outside the school office. That name, Medisol, wasn't unfamiliar. He'd seen their vans, driving through the neighborhoods, their logo stamped on health kits and charity banners. I'm not just someone who came to say thanks, she continued. I have the means, not unlimited, but enough, to change a few things. And I want to start with Caio, and with you. Jonas frowned slightly, not out of doubt, but confusion. People didn't offer help without wanting something in return. That was the rule he had learned too well. Why us? He asked quietly. Why him? Sonia looked at him, unwavering. Because your son reminded me what humanity looks like. Because I was sinking, and instead of looking away, he gave me the only thing he had, his bus fare, without hesitation, without knowing who I was. That kind of heart deserves protection, support, a future. Jonas leaned back, arms folded across his chest, eyes fixed on the wall ahead, as if it could help him process what he was hearing. You want to, what, sponsor him? He asked cautiously. Something like that, Sonia replied. I've already spoken with a colleague at the education board. There's a discretionary fund we allocate to students who demonstrate extraordinary character under difficult circumstances. I want to recommend Caio for full assistance. Lunch program, school supplies, after-school tutoring if he needs it. No press, no spotlight, just quiet support. She paused, then added, I'd like to provide some support for you as well. Through Medisol, we have community partners in the maintenance division, and your background in electrical systems could qualify you for a role. Jonas didn't respond immediately. His fingers tapped against his knee, slowly, rhythmically. The offer sounded like a dream too fragile to touch. I've been out of steady work for almost a year, he said finally. Picked up some odd jobs here and there, but nothing formal. And people don't exactly line up to hire guys with patchy resumes and no college degree. Sonia nodded. I understand that. But this isn't a favor. It's an opportunity. They're always looking for reliable technicians. People who know how to work under pressure. I can arrange an interview. What happens after that depends on you. They won't give you a pass because of me, but I'll get you in the door. Jonas turned his head toward her, his eyes darker now. You're offering a lot for someone you met on a bus. I'm offering this because I believe in restoring balance, she replied. And because your son changed me. I don't want anything in return. You don't owe me gratitude or stories or anything. Just let me do this. For a few moments he didn't speak. He was quiet in a way that wasn't defensive, just exhausted. A man who had spent so long carrying weight that he didn't know how to react when someone offered to help carry it. All right, he said slowly. You can give my name to your contact. I'll go to the interview. But if this turns into something weird, it won't, Sonia said gently. I promise. They sat in silence, not awkward, but thoughtful. The kind of silence that comes when two people from different paths realize they might be walking in the same direction for a while. Jonas rubbed the back of his neck, shaking his head like he still couldn't believe it. I've never had someone show up like this. Most people just nod and move on. Or worse, look right through us like we're invisible. Sonia's gaze softened. That's why I couldn't be one of those people. Caio didn't look through me. He looked at me. And now I'm looking at both of you. Jonas let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. He's gonna be shocked when he hears about all this. Probably thinks you disappeared into the city. Let's keep it that way. For now, she said. No grand gestures, no sudden visits. Let him settle into the changes without questions. It'll mean more that way. Jonas nodded. All right, we do this quietly. For him. By the time they stood, the school hallway had emptied. The final bell was about to ring, and parents were starting to trickle in for pickups. Jonas extended his hand, firm and respectful. Thank you, Sonia, he said, no longer guarded. Not just for the help, for seeing him. Sonia shook hand, her grip confident. It's the least I can do, she replied. But it's only the beginning. He watched as she walked away, her figure fading into the corridor. For the first time in a long while, Jonas felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest. Not just hope, but belief. Belief that things could get better. That the world wasn't entirely indifferent. That maybe, just maybe, kindness could echo. The following day, Jonas received a phone call from Medisol's HR department. The woman on the other end was polite, efficient, and clearly aware of who had referred him. They scheduled an interview for the following week at one of the company's central maintenance hubs. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a door. Meanwhile, a letter arrived from Caio's school, congratulating the family on being selected for a new character-based scholarship program, complete meal coverage, upgraded school materials, and participation in a mentorship initiative. Jonas read the letter twice, then a third time. The words were real. The logo at the top was Medisol's. He folded it carefully and slipped it into a drawer beside his bed, where he kept things worth protecting. And for the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe a little deeper. That evening, Caio returned from school humming a tune, his steps lighter than usual. He placed his backpack on the table, took off his shoes, and glanced around. Dad, he called. Jonas stepped out from the small kitchenette, wiping his hands. Got something for you, he said, handing him the letter. Caio read it slowly, eyes widening. Is this real? He asked. Feels like it, Jonas replied, watching his son. Looks like someone noticed what you did. Caio grinned, cheeks flushing with surprise. But I didn't do it for this. I know, Jonas said, pulling him into a brief hug. That's why it matters. And in that embrace, in that moment between father and son, the weight of hard years began to lift. Not all at once, but enough to make space for what was coming next. Help me carry the other bag, Caio, Jonas said, adjusting the weight of the cardboard box pressed against his hip. Caio, eyes gleaming and arms wrapped around a bag full of folded clothes and school books, rushed over to grab the last grocery sack sitting near the door. The apartment wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, modest furniture, and walls that needed a fresh coat of paint. But to them, it felt like everything. It wasn't about the square footage or the tile floors. It was about the fact that the heater worked, the ceiling didn't leak, and the neighbors nodded when they passed by. It was about walking to school in under 10 minutes and no longer falling asleep to the sounds of someone shouting in the hallway. It was about having a kitchen where Jonas could make pancakes on Sunday without worrying if the gas would be shut off. As they stepped into their new home, both carrying the last of their belongings from the borrowed truck outside, Caio paused in the doorway, looking around with a mix of disbelief and joy. "This is ours?" he asked, his voice small, as if afraid the answer would change. Jonas smiled. "It's ours." Caio ran into what would now be his bedroom, a space just big, enough for a twin mattress, a shelf, and a small desk that Jonas had salvaged from a donation center. He threw his bag onto the bed and turned in a slow circle, taking in the blank walls as if trying to imagine the posters and drawings that would soon fill them. For the first time in a long time, he felt a kind of stability that didn't come from what he was told, but from what he could see, feel, and claim. Jonas, meanwhile, returned to the kitchen, where a second-hand table with mismatched chairs stood proudly under a ceiling light that didn't flicker. He opened the refrigerator and stared for a moment at the neatly packed containers of leftovers, the fresh produce, the milk and juice, signs of a full pantry for more than just 2 days. It had taken 2 paychecks from Medisol, a careful budget, and Sonia's quiet intervention in getting them relocated through a community housing program, but they were finally somewhere they could breathe. That evening, after unpacking, Jonas made rice and beans with grilled chicken. Nothing fancy, but Caio ate like it was a holiday feast. He asked for seconds, something he hadn't done in weeks. "Tomorrow I'm going to take my new notebook to school," he said between bites. "The one with the little rocket on the cover." Jonas chuckled. "That one's cool. You'll impress the teacher." Caio shrugged. "It's not about impressing her. I just want to look like the other kids for once." Jonas didn't reply right away. He reached over, placed a hand on his son's shoulder, and squeezed gently. "You never have to look like anyone else to matter, Caio. But I get it. It feels good to fit in sometimes." Caio nodded and went back to eating, but Jonas saw the subtle lift in his shoulders. He knew what his son had carried all this time, the quiet shame of not having enough, of noticing when others didn't notice him. Tonight, that weight seemed a little lighter. A few days later, there was a knock at the door. Caio opened it cautiously and smiled wide when he saw her. "Sonia!" he shouted, stepping aside to let her in. She entered carrying a bag with 2 books and a small potted plant. "For your new window," she said, holding it out to Caio, who accepted it like it was made of diamonds. Jonas greeted her with a grateful nod. They didn't speak like donor and beneficiary. There was no awkwardness, no forced politeness. Their words flowed, like people who had already crossed the bridge of survival together. She sat at the small table, and Caio joined them with the enthusiasm only children could sustain. "I got a star sticker on my math test," he announced proudly. "That's amazing," she replied, beaming. "You're not just smart, you're brave too." "That's a powerful mix." Caio blushed and buried his face behind the book she had just handed him. Jonas poured them each a glass of juice, and for a moment, it felt like an ordinary gathering between friends. No charity, no past wounds, just connection. Sonia never stayed too long. She always brought something small, a notebook, pencils, a reading tip, but never anything that made it seem like she was swooping in to save them. She understood dignity. She understood that sometimes the most powerful help is the kind that whispers instead of shouts. Jonas had come to appreciate her visits more than he admitted. They didn't speak much about the bus or what Caio had done. That was already a shared memory etched in the fabric of their story. Now, they talked about future things, Medisol projects, school updates, books Caio might like. With her help, Jonas had found not just a job, but purpose. His supervisors at the maintenance division had noticed his attention to detail and calm demeanor under pressure. They were already talking about moving him into a training program to supervise teams. For the first time in years, Jonas felt like he was building something that wouldn't collapse under him. One evening, while folding laundry in his room, Jonas glanced through the door and saw Caio lying on the floor with his math homework spread out and one of Sonia's books open beside him. The boy hummed softly, pencil scratching against the page, his brow furrowed with focus. Jonas stood there, watching silently, overwhelmed not just by pride, but by a kind of sacred gratitude. This wasn't just a roof. This was peace. This was the absence of dread. This was knowing that if something broke, he could fix it. That if his son was hungry, he could feed him. That if tomorrow brought a challenge, he wouldn't be fighting it alone or from a place of absolute lack. It had taken one moment on a bus, one instinctual act from a child, and the courage of a stranger to see it through, but it had changed everything. On her next visit, Sonia brought a board game. "To exercise your logic," she said to Caio, grinning. They played it that afternoon. The three of them huddled around the small table, laughing, arguing over the rules, teasing one another when someone made a silly move. It was ordinary. It was mundane. But Jonas couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that. Not politely, not just to get through a conversation, but really laughed. Caio, at one point, leaned into Sonia's shoulder and whispered something that made her laugh so hard she had to put the game pieces down. Jonas watched the two of them, a child and a woman who had nothing, binding them but a moment of shared humanity, and felt something he hadn't let himself feel in years. He felt home. "I didn't think I'd have to talk in front of everyone," Caio whispered to his teacher as she handed him the microphone. His palms were damp, and he kept shifting his feet on the wooden floor of the school's modest auditorium. Around him, students in colorful shirts and paper hearts pinned to their chests chatted and fidgeted, excited for the Kindness Week assembly to begin. "You'll do great," the teacher whispered back, smiling warmly. "Just speak from the heart, Caio. That's what this is all about." He nodded, holding the microphone like it might bite him, and took a deep breath. His eyes scanned the rows of folding chairs filled with students, parents, and teachers. Somewhere near the back he spotted two familiar faces. Jonas sat tall, hands folded over his lap, a rare softness in his eyes. Beside him, Sonia leaned forward slightly, her expression open, proud but restrained, just as she always carried herself, never asking for credit, never taking the spotlight. Seeing them there anchored him. He gripped the mic tighter and stepped forward, the chatter in the room fading as he began to speak. "I was asked to talk about someone who changed my life," Caio began, his voice quiet at first, but clear. "And I thought for a long time about what I would say, because it's hard to explain how one small moment can change everything." The room was silent now, all eyes fixed on the small boy with big words. Caio glanced briefly at the floor, then back at the crowd. "A few months ago, I got on the bus by myself for the first time. My dad had a job interview and we didn't have much money. He gave me our last coin so I could get to school and buy a slice of pizza. That's all we had." His voice didn't waver. He wasn't trying to gain pity, only to tell the truth. "And then a woman got on the bus. She was hurt, scared, and didn't have anything. The driver yelled at her, told her to leave, and everyone just watched." He paused. "Everyone, except me." Sonia's hand tightened slightly on the edge of her seat, but she didn't look away. Jonas, sitting beside her, gave her a side glance, then returned his gaze to the stage, jaw clenched with pride. Caio continued, now with more certainty in his voice. "I gave her my coin, the one my dad gave me. I don't know why I did it. I just knew it was the right thing. I didn't even think about the pizza until after. I didn't do it to be a hero or anything. I did it because nobody else was going to." The audience remained still, some leaning forward, some blinking quickly. A few teachers exchanged quiet glances. "That woman, her name is Sonia. She changed everything for us," Caio said, now looking toward the back of the room. "She didn't forget. She didn't pretend it didn't matter. She helped us, quietly. She helped my dad find work, helped me with school. She saw us, really saw us, and I'll never forget that." Jonas inhaled through his nose, fighting back the tightening in his throat. He had rehearsed this moment in his head for weeks, but nothing prepared him for the way Caio stood on that stage, not like a child, but like someone who had earned every inch of that platform. Sonia sat with her shoulders drawn in slightly, as if trying to become invisible, but her eyes shimmered with the weight of Caio's words. She hadn't expected him to name her. She hadn't expected him to tell the story at all. That coin had been small. His act had been quiet, but what he had given her was something that had rippled far beyond the bus ride. And now here they were, in a school auditorium, watching that ripple become a wave. Caio lowered the microphone for a second and glanced at the note in his pocket, though he didn't need it. My dad always says that, even if it's small, if you have something to give, you should give it, he said. It could be a coin, a smile, a seat, a chance. You don't know what it'll mean to the other person. You don't know how it might change them, or how it might change you. He paused again, letting the weight of his words settle into the room. So, if you're ever in a place where you can help someone, even just a little, do it. You might not see what happens next, but I promise, something happens. He stepped back, holding the mic against his chest for a moment before handing it to the teacher. The applause started slowly, like people weren't sure if it was allowed to clap after something that felt sacred. But then it grew, strong, sincere, and sustained. Back in his seat, Caio looked over at his dad, who leaned over and ruffled his hair before pulling him into a quick, fierce hug. No words were needed. Sonia waited until the crowd began to disperse before standing. She walked slowly toward them, not wanting to intrude, but Caio spotted her and ran into her arms. She knelt to meet him, her face buried in his shoulder for a second before pulling back. "You didn't have to say my name," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." Jonas joined them, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than we can ever repay," he said. "I didn't do it for that," she whispered. "I did it because he reminded me who I used to be." Caio looked between them and smiled, unaware of how profoundly he had changed both their lives, simply by choosing kindness when it mattered most. Later that day, as the school emptied and the sun dipped low, the three of them sat outside on a bench, sharing crackers and juice from Caio's backpack. No one talked about the speech anymore. They talked about silly things, books, games, what they'd cook on Sunday. It was as if the ceremony had lifted something heavy and replaced it with ease. And while the world outside still spun with its chaos and injustice, in that small pocket of time, everything felt right. Jonas looked over at Sonia, then at Caio, and thought, this is what rebuilding looks like. Not grand gestures, but moments. Real ones. The kind that begin on a bus with a coin and never really end. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Edward's Tales for more powerful stories like this one. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and send this video to someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists. See you in the next tale.